Sometimes it's hard to be a woman.
They sold us fairy tales in rhinestones, but behind the spotlight, the vows frayed, the bottles shattered, and the truth sang louder than any chorus. This isn't a museum tour of polite legends. It's the late-night drive after the show when the bus windows fog and the stories finally come out. Country royalty built empires on heartbreak because the heartbreak was real. Fans heard devotion, spouses heard footsteps at 3 a.m., and doors that wouldn't close. The industry kept smiling photos on the covers, but every glossy cover hid a bargain someone at home never agreed to. Tammy and George Jones felt like thunder meeting a church hymn, a harmony that made people cry while the house burned down behind the curtain. She stood by her man until standing upright itself became an act of bravery because love can't outvote a bottle forever. George could be sweet as spring and then a different person by nightfall, making the next morning an obstacle course of regret. The shows glowed, the kitchen cooled. Their records sounded like they understood every marriage in the audience. Johnny Cash and Vivian learned that a stage can steal a husband inch by inch. Vivian watched the bus schedule eat weekends, then months, then entire seasons. The pills showed up as little helpers for the grind, then became the grind. The spotlight drifted toward June, and the marriage felt like a living room with the furniture slowly carried out by strangers. Vivian didn't lose to a myth. She lost to chemistry, touring miles, and a man who followed a voice only he could hear. People call it destiny. Loretta Lynn married Doolittle Lynn and turned her bruises into warnings set to fiddles. She wasn't just writing hits. She was filing dispatches from a house under pressure. Doo strayed, drank, and swaggered. Loretta recorded, toured, and survived. Staying doesn't equal stupidity. Sometimes it equals an era, a community, an entire identity you were promised would reward endurance. She stayed long enough to chart pain into an instruction manual for women who needed to hear their own lives reflected back, loud and undeniable on the radio. Hank Williams and Audrey were a spark that never learned how to be a hearth. He limped through pain and found relief in the nearest bottle. She refused to vanish while the world worshipped his loneliness. They married, split, reconciled, repeated, a two-step that left holes in the floor. Cheating was the headline. The subhead was pressure, fatigue, and the slow trade a body makes when the calendar won't quit. The songs made him immortal, but immortals aren't present. The house needed a husband. The crowds kept demanding their favorite ghost. Willie Nelson and Shirley Collie proved that secrets don't survive small towns or sharp eyes. The story that won't die is a hospital bill with someone else's baby listed. A rectangle of paper that turned the private into public without a single guitar note. Willie can laugh about it now because humor keeps a person from drowning in their own past. But paper is merciless. It itemized the price of looking the other way. The marriage didn't crumble in a scandalous kiss, it evaporated in bookkeeping ink that never comes out. Conway Twitty married young to Ellen Matthews, and then learned fame is a vacuum with charm. The stage asked more, then more again, and home grew quiet except for the arguments that show up when two people feel invisible. By the time he looked back for that first promise, the bridge was ash and the river didn't remember his name. Folks love to romanticize the legend, but the ledger of late nights, soft excuses, and sudden confessions is familiar to anyone who has ever loved a star more than the star loved ordinary life. Patsy Cline and Charlie Dick were gasoline and spark, a soundtrack of breakthroughs cut with slammed doors. She rose like a rocket and the house learned to brace itself. Money stress, pride, and barbed words are not exclusive to famous couples. They're just louder when the next morning includes a radio interview. They made truces that didn't hold, loved hard, and fought harder. History softens tragedies until they look like watercolor, but people who were there remember the sharp edges that didn't fade at all. Glenn Campbell and Sarah Barg watched a golden voice turn slippery. Temptations arrived with the encore, and the confessions arrived with the dawn. When she left, he spun harder, a carousel nobody could slow down. Then came Tanya Tucker, Two storm fronts colliding, moving from laughter to shouting faster than a key change, a little powder spoken about in whispers, too many drinks poured like gasoline, and hotel rooms that kept the dents like souvenirs. They weren't married to each other, but the wreckage dragged behind them like cans tied to a bumper. Porter Wagoner dazzled in rhinestones while Ruth Williams measured the bills and the rumors. Work became life. Life became backstage. Backstage became a sentence you couldn't finish without a lawyer. Dolly Parton walked in with a pen and a voice that cut through steel, and suddenly business, art, loyalty, and hurt braided themselves into an unbreakable knot. When the knot finally got dragged into court, the cameras treated it like a matinee. A judge can decide money, a judge can't erase the years you tried to keep together with duct tape and forgiveness. Kitty Wells and Johnny Wright stayed, a rarity in a town that eats rings for breakfast. They heard the gossip hum, nodded politely, and kept their own counsel. Longevity doesn't mean the road was smooth. It means someone kept buying tires and learning how to patch. Endurance doesn't sell headlines because it doesn't explode, but it matters. It reminds us that not every country love story ends with ash. Some end with gray hair and a quiet porch. Roy Acuff spent so much time at the Opry that the house lights might as well have been his kitchen bulbs. Mildred Douglas lived a different orbit, a separate quiet that stretched for years. People think distance is measured by miles. It isn't. It's measured by dinners missed, birthdays celebrated by phone, and the slow fading of shared jokes. He never remarried after she passed. Some griefs become a second skin and never come off. Merle Haggard and Leona Williams sang together, wrote together, and clashed like veterans who knew every weak spot the other had. Jealousy doesn't play an instrument, but when it's in the band, it bends every note. Add the old friends, beer, late hours, pride, and suddenly home feels like a green room where no one wants to sit. Merle later said he was impossible, as if the word could carry the boxes out by itself. Honesty doesn't fix the mess, but it does lock the door behind you when you finally leave. George Jones and Shirley Ann Corley tell the mower story like a cartoon. He rode to the liquor store after she hid the car keys, and the world turned it into a punchline. Punchlines don't file for custody. They don't balance checkbooks. Jokes let fans laugh instead of look too closely. Shirley reached the limit most hearts keep hidden until the day it arrives. She left because love and limits live in the same house, and only one pays the mortgage on sanity. Jim Reeves sounded like velvet and left a maze. Mary tried to be wife, partner, and later guardian of a legacy that drew more hands than a poker table. Rumors swirled about the life on the road. After he was gone, the arguments didn't stop. They just changed venues. Courts replaced kitchens. Filings replaced pleas. An estate can feel colder than any empty bed. You learn quick that grief wears a tie when money is in the room. Dolly Parton and Carl Dean practiced a different magic: public generosity and private boundaries. She admitted temptations nipped at the edges, that emotional detours almost became new maps, and still they found a way to choose the same house again. The trick, perhaps, was that one of them loved the spotlight and the other loved her. In a genre obsessed with confession, they guarded what mattered with a grin and a wink, and the marriage endured because not every truth belongs to an audience. Charlie Rich poured warm bourbon tones into microphones while Margaret Ann tried to talk to a man hiding in plain sight. The bottle turned pauses into walls, and the road turned weeks into blinks. Staying doesn't mean smiling, sometimes it means white-knuckling through holidays until the storm quiets. They held on, but every grip costs skin. Faron Young burned hot and fast, walking into rooms with charm and sparks falling off him. Hilda Macon faced the temper, the roaming attention, and the apologies that age like milk. She reached the moment every worn-out partner eventually meets, the calm certainty that the next explosion will look exactly like the last one. That's when leaving becomes less a decision and more a reflex. Billy Joe Shaver and Brenda Tyndall kept trying to rebuild the same house in the same floodplain. Love can be stubborn, so can bad habits. They married, divorced, remarried, divorced, promising each time that this was the sober season, the clear-eyed one. Chaos collects interest, By the time Peace shows up with a suitcase, the locks don't work anymore. Genie C. Riley rode a rocket she didn't entirely steer. Mickey Riley watched their life rewire overnight. New faces, late calls, strange calendars. Then Faith rewired it again. Reinvention can save a soul and still cost a marriage, because not everyone changes at the same speed or in the same direction. The tabloids wrote it like betrayal. Maybe it was two people answering different bells. Barbara Mandrell and Ken Dudney learned how to outlast whispers. The 80s demanded perfection from its stars and manufactured scandals when perfection got boring. They built a bunker nobody could see, a life where rumors knocked on the door and left without a quote. That doesn't mean they didn't hurt. It means they chose each other while the industry chose narratives. And then there were those Nashville-adjacent rumors people wouldn't print. Jim Nabors wasn't a standard country act, but his name circulated in southern showbiz circles with a knowing smirk that carried both malice and risk in that era. Careers bent under insinuations whispered in green rooms and charity galas. In a time when being complicated could end you, many learned to build decoy lives. Some marriages buckled under that weight, not because someone failed to love, but because fear ran the household with rules none of the neighbors dared to name. Royalties, lawyers, accountants, the quieter villains of domestic tragedy. After the funerals, spouses often faced a second storm: old contracts, missing statements, cousins with claims, managers with memories that didn't match receipts. Mary Reeves wasn't the only one who discovered that grief becomes paperwork when catalogs are valuable. There's nothing romantic about an audit, but it can break a heart faster than any fling. If you're mapping common threads, addiction is the highway. The road stretches, the body aches. Someone offers relief with a grin. The calendar demands another town before sunrise. Coke seems like fuel. Cannabis seems like a soft landing. The hard stuff hovers at the edge of the party. The bottle always smiles. At first, the music gets easier. Later, apologies grow stale, and the cost arrives with interest. Fame doesn't invent weakness. It rents a bullhorn for it. Jealousy is another instrument you can hear even when no one names it. The crowd may love both partners, but applause rarely lands evenly. One person becomes the comet. The other becomes gravity. Or the duet convinces everyone there's more there than a chord progression, and the person at home hears the roar like a siren. Resentment turns to surveillance. Surveillance to arguments that recycle for years. The towel on the floor becomes a war flag. You say it's about neatness. It's not. And then there's the business itself. Managers who say the audience owns you. Publicists who sell airbrushed forgiveness. Attorneys who transform betrayal into a clause. A singer might be worth more mysterious or worth more single. A duet might be worth more if tension remains unsolved. The brand becomes the third partner with veto power. Love gets notes, then revisions, then a deadline it can't meet. When legends speak plainly, late in life they stop casting themselves as saints. George admitted he was the problem. Merle said living with him was a job nobody could keep. Willie turned shame into an anecdote because otherwise shame would eat breakfast with him every day. Loretta gave women a script to point to when home felt like a trap. These aren't alibis, they're testimonies, and they matter more than the glossy myths. If you came for happy endings, country prefers honest ones. Tammy and George kept singing together after they couldn't live together, a miracle and a wound on the same stage. Johnny found June. Vivian found a life where midnight didn't require triage. Tanya and Glenn burned so bright they left scorch marks in places the cameras never found. Dolly kept the generosity public and the marriage private, which is how you get to keep both. Some couples rebuilt, others waved from opposite sides of a life they once built together. So what do these marriages actually teach? That love isn't a rehab, a booking agent, or a miracle bus that hauls two broken hearts over a mountain by morning. Fame is an amplifier. Bring patience and it echoes. Bring rage and it roars. Bring a habit and it becomes a calendar. The person at home is asked to absorb the shock. The person on the road is asked to bleed professionally and smile anyway. Every open secret raises a private invoice. People ask if the old days were worse, the walls were thicker then, and the press often played along. Today, cameras sit in every pocket, but pain never cared about technology. It cares whether anyone puts the bottle down, whether counseling happens, whether a tour pauses before a marriage breaks. In these stories, the choices came late or not at all, and the music kept playing because the show must go on is both a slogan and a curse. Even in the ruins, softness appears. A bill quietly paid, a call placed before a show to check on an ex's surgery, flowers sent without a signature. These gestures don't repair what broke, they honor that something once mattered. It's easier to call people villains or angels. The truth is that most were both, depending on the day and the chorus. So when a classic track hushes a bar 3 notes in, remember the mortgages, the slammed doors, the kids who learned to read a face when the doorknob turned. Remember that managers knew every secret and still booked the tour. Remember that a love song can be both confession and costume. The grooves feel warm decades later because they were carved by people who bled for them, on stage and at the kitchen sink. The fairy tale version is tidy. Talent meets destiny, rings shine, the soundtrack swells. The real version is messy, 2 people trying not to drown while the world watches. Country music at its best never lied about that. It wrapped the truth in melody and left the seams visible. Listen closely, and you can hear the breath caught before a dangerous line, the stutter on a hard admission, the chorus landing like a promise finally said out loud. If these marriages shocked you, good. Shock wakes us up, but let it push you past the gasp toward the patterns you're living. Are you repeating arguments with new costumes? Are you waiting for the other person to become someone they told you they weren't? The legends didn't fall because they were uniquely weak. They fell because they were human in a machine built to sell perfection. Humanity and machines have never kept the same rhythm. You came for scandal and stayed, I hope, for the people under the sequins. The next time a jukebox leans into a song about forever, picture the tour bus at midnight, the spouse at the window, the call that doesn't come. Some couples made it out together, many didn't. All of them left pieces of themselves behind. That's why those records still feel alive when the needle drops. They're not just hits. They're keepsakes from lives that tried to balance glory with ordinary mercy and learned how high the cost can be. Remember, the studio lights fade, but the choices echo. In every chorus, someone pays, someone prays, and someone finally walks toward daylight.